Hello, my name is Abdul Hai. I want to begin with a question. Do great trade routes emerge from peace and stability or from disruption and chaos? Most people would assume stability. After all, merchants need safety to trade. But history shows us something more surprising. The greatest trade networks in human history, the Silk Roads, were not born in times of peace, but in moments of chaos. My thesis statement is Silk Roads emerged from disruption, Han expansion after the decline of the Jingnu mirrors, China's post Soviet engagement in Central Asia. Across 2000 years, the logic has remained consistent. Power vacuums open opportunities for ambitious states to build new trade corridors. Let's go into the history part of the ancient Silk Road. The Han dynasty faced a relentless rival of Jingnu Empire. They were expert horsemen, raiders, and empire builders. From Mongolia into Central Asia, the Jingnu dominated huge part of territory. But by the 2nd century BC, the Jingnu were weakening. Internal conflicts, succession struggles, and rival factions fragmented their power, and this was the moment the Han had been waiting for. Historian Peter Frankopan, in his book The Silk Roads: A New History of the World, explains how the Han launched a decade-long campaign to secure the rich western regions of Zhou, driving back the nomads and seizing the Gangshu corridor by 119 BC. This was a bold military gamble, but it paid off. The Gangshu corridor became the lifeline connecting China to the wider world. At the same time, Emperor Wu sent Zhang Huan on his famous mission in 138 BC. Although Zhang Huan failed to secure alliances, he brought back something even more valuable: knowledge. He revealed that powerful kingdoms, horses, and markets existed far beyond Jingnu. His report inspired Empire Wu to pursue new opportunities, opening the Silk Road around 180 BC. Now, once the Han secured this opening, they didn't stop at military conquest. They invested heavily in infrastructure, supply depots, and secure road system through the Hexi corridor. Now, Craig Benjamin in Empires of Ancient Eurasia emphasizes that these investments were the backbone that allowed merchant networks to thrive for centuries. So, what do we see? The Silk Road wasn't born from peaceful trade between equal partners, it emerged from disruption. When the Jingnu collapsed, the Han moved swiftly, using both military power and infrastructure to transform instability into connectivity. Now let's fast forward to our own era. The Soviet Union collapsed in 1991. Suddenly, five new Central Asian states emerged. These countries had weak economies, unstable politics, and no clear direction. It was the biggest Central Asian power vacuum since the fall of Mongol Empire. And once again, China saw an opportunity. At first, China was cautious. It spent 2 decades building quite the Central Asia program At first, China was cautious. It spent 2 decades building quite bilateral ties. But in 2013, President Xi Jinping made his move. He announced the Belt and Road Initiative, or BRI, at a university in Kazakhstan. The Central Asia program at George Washington University notes that choosing Kazakhstan was deeply symbolic. Central Asia, the former Soviet sphere, would now become the launchpad for China's new Silk Road vision. The BRI promised trillions of dollars in infrastructure, railway, pipelines, highways, and digital networks spanning Asia, Europe, and Africa. And the logic was same as 2 millennia earlier. Disruption had created a vacuum, and China stepped in to build something lasting. The results have been dramatic. By 2023, trade between China and Central Asia had reached nearly $90 billion, with Kazakhstan alone accounting for almost half. According to World Bank data, these aren't just trade statistics. They show China has embedded itself economically and politically in a region once dominated by Moscow. And the strategy mirrors the Han example, building infrastructure first, then enabling commerce, just as the Han built forts and supply depots. China today builds roads, railway, and energy corridors. So, what ties these two stories together? First, timing. Han expansion came right after Jingnu decline. The BRI accelerated after Soviet collapse. In both cases, Chinese leaders acted not during stability, but precisely when others' power had crumbled. Second, infrastructure as strategy. The Han built corridors of forts and roads. China built railway and digital links. Both approaches create permanence, turning a temporary power vacuum into a long-term commercial network. Third, geography. The same corridor mattered 2000 years ago and still matters today. The Hexi corridor, the Ferghana Valley, the Caspian routes, all are choke points then and now. And finally, logic. Trade networks don't just grow naturally from economic demand, they are politically projects. Born when ambition states recognize that disruption can be turned into opportunity. So let me return to the question I asked at the beginning. Do trade networks come from peace or from disruption? The evidence from both history and present is clear. The Silk Roads, ancient and modern, were born from disruption. The Han seized the chance when Jingnu declined. China today sees the chance when the Soviet Union collapsed. Both moments reminded us that instability, while frightening, also creates space for new possibilities. For China, disruption has always been not a barrier but a gateway, a chance to transform chaos into connectivity and weakness into influence. Thank you very much. That's all for me.
Assalamu alaikum everyone. Today I am presenting on the Silk Roads, a network of trade routes that have connected civilizations across Asia, Europe, and Africa for over 2 millennia. My presentation explores the continuities and changes in merchant networks and international markets along the Silk Roads, both in ancient times and in the modern Belt and Road Initiative (BRI). The Silk Roads were not simply trade routes, they were vital bridges for cultural exchanges, the movement of goods, and the spread of ideas. From the Han Dynasty in the 2nd century BCE to today's BRI, these routes have undergone major transformations, but their core role of global connectivity remains unchanged. Merchants like the Sogdians played a crucial role in linking East and West. They didn't just trade silk and spices, they were also cultural brokers, facilitating the exchange of ideas, religions, and technologies. As Frankopan 2025 stated that the Silk Roads were not simply trade routes, they were vital channels of the exchange of knowledge, religion, and culture. These, these merchants ensured the continuity of these trade routes, connecting distant civilizations just like their modern counterparts in today's global trade networks. In ancient times, trade flourished with the support of imperial patronage. Han emperors supported the development of these trade routes to secure luxury goods like silk for the Roman Empire. This pattern of state support of trade for trade continues to today with China's Belt and Road Initiative (BRI), which aims to rehabilitate revitalize and expand these ancient connections through modern infrastructures, projects like high-speed rail, ports, and digital highways. The BRI, in a modern day, reflection of the Silk Roads, bringing global connectivity through led initiatives such as just as emperors did centuries ago. Frankopan 2025 also mentions The new Silk Roads of the 21st century may be high-speed trains and digital highways, but they are still based on the same idea, bringing people, goods, and ideas together across vast distances. This evolution from overland routes to digital trade shows how, even with technological advancements, the purpose of the Silk Road's global exchange has remained the same. Now, let's take a moment to consider the role of merchants in these networks. In antiquity, the merchants, like the Sogdians, were crucial to connecting the East and West. They traded goods, but they also served as cultural mediators, facilitating religion and ideas along with material goods. Today, global merchants and trade networks continue to serve this bridging role, moving goods and service across vast distances. The role of the merchant is still vital to the global economy, just as it was in antiquity. Whether it's a global shipping company moving goods or a digital platform connecting buyers and sellers across continents, the network of connectivity remains a core theme of the Silk Roads. To sum up, the Silk Roads have undergone dramatic transformations, from ancient overland trade routes to modern-day global trade networks. Despite these changes, the core principle of the Silk Roads, connecting distant lands of the exchange for goods, culture, and ideas, remains unchanged. The Belt and Road Initiative represents the modern incarnation of this age-old system, proving that the Silk Road's function as a global connector is as relevant today as it was 2 millennia ago. Looking ahead, the Silk Roads will continue to evolve with digital trade, e-commerce, and innovations in logistics and technology. Yet, one thing will remain unchanged: the human need for connectivity to bridge the gaps between us, to exchange ideas, values, and cultures, and to push forward toward a more interconnected global community. As we consider the long legacy of the Silk Roads, we are reminded of the enduring power of global connectivity, a vision that has not only survived the passage of time but continues to shape our world today. Thank you, everyone, for your patience.
Hello everyone, my name is Ryan Ahmed. Today I want to share about merchant as a social and political actors on the Silk Road. When you hear about the word merchant, we often imagine someone just buying and selling goods. But on the Silk Road, merchants were much more than that. They shaped politics, culture, even law. In many ways, they act almost like today's multinational companies. First, merchants were community builders. When they traveled long distance, they didn't just sell silk or spices and live. They settled down and formed permanent communities. The Sogdian merchants of Central Asia are a good example. They lived in many Silk Road cities and built their own temple, glide, and rest houses. Those communities helped merchants trust each other, share information, and solve disputes. So, trader was not only about money, it was also about building a network of people. If you look at the picture of the camel caravan, you can imagine how merchants carried more than goods. They also carried knowledge, language, even religion. And second, merchants often became political actors. Rulers needed them because they knew the roots, the language, and the custom of many religions. Sometimes merchants act like diplomats. In the Mediterranean, Venetian merchants became so powerful that they signed treaties with Byzantium, collected tax, and even controlled colonies. They started as traders, but they became political leaders who would influence war and alliances. The image of Venetian merchant shows how trade relationship could become political partnership and later even rivalries. Third, merchant changed how Laws and money system worked. Long distance trade was full of risks, bandits, desert, and dishonest partners. So manage this, merchant created contract credit system and their own courts. Rulers often gave them special privileges like tax break or legal independence. At the same time, rich merchants lent money to king or city rulers, which gave them even more political influence. In this way, merchants were not only part of the colony, but they helped to shape the rule of the society. Merchants also act as cultural brokers. They spread religion like Buddhism, Christianity, and Islam across the region. They introduced new technologies like paper and gunpowder to different empires. Even small things like a way of keeping account were carried by merchants and later adopted by government. This shows that merchants shaped how people lived and thought, not just what they consumed. When I compare this with today, I see many similarities between Silk Road merchant and modern multinational companies. Companies like Amazon, Alibaba, and others just move goods. They also negotiate with governments, build infrastructure, and influence culture. For example, just like Venetian merchant once influenced political in Byzantium, today big corporate companies can influence trade law, even international religion. The main difference is scale. Ancient merchants relied on family trust and caravans, while today's firm use digital network and international law. But the basic idea is the same. Those who control trade routes also hold social and political power. In conclusion, Silk Road merchants were not ordinary traders. They were community leaders, diplomats, lawmakers, and cultural messengers. They influenced rulers, spread religion and technologies, and but institutions that last long after their journey ended. Today, global corporations play similar role, reminding us that trade is just never economic. It is always political and social too. To me, this lesson is clear. Those who control the flow of goods and ideas also helped shape the direction of history. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I'm Nahin Raida Khan. When we talk about the Silk Road, most people imagine caravans loaded with silk, spices, and porcelain. But if we stop there, we miss the bigger story. The Silk Road was not only an economic network, it was the world's first intellectual highway. It carried ideas, institutions, and skills across vast distances, shaping civilization in ways far more lasting than material goods. Today, I want to explore this through two images. One, Xuanzang's journey in Dunhuang art, and the Mongol siege of Baghdad in 1258. The first image depicts the Buddhist monk Xuanzang returning from India with hundreds of Sanskrit manuscripts. What strikes me here is not just the exotic imagery of an elephant and a caravan, but the system it represents. Xuanzang did not simply carry scriptures, he carried tools for thinking, methods of debate, logic, medicine, and astronomy. When he returned to Chang'an, he established translation teams that worked like structured projects, assigning roles, standardizing terminology, and checking accuracy. This was not a casual exchange, it was organized knowledge transfer. My argument here is that monasteries and translation bureaus were the hidden engines of the Silk Road. They transformed travel into education and ensured ideas could survive across languages and cultures. Now, if Xuanzang's journey represents the creative flourishing of exchange, the second image, the Mongol siege of Baghdad in 1258, represents its fragility. Baghdad had been a powerhouse of intellectual synthesis. Scholars there compared Greek, Persian, Indian, and Chinese texts, producing original advances in philosophy, mathematics, and medicine. In a sense, Baghdad was an early research hub, not just a library. But with the Mongol invasion, much of this infrastructure was destroyed in a single stroke. The famous House of Wisdom collapsed, and thousands of manuscripts were lost. The image of Mongol soldiers storming the city reminds us that political violence could interrupt centuries of accumulated knowledge in a matter of days. By putting these two images side by side, we see a tension. On one hand, knowledge moved across empires because monks, scholars, and translators built resilient systems like monasteries, schools, and archives spread across regions. On the other hand, centers of knowledge could also collapse suddenly, as Baghdad shows. This contrast leads me to argue that the Silk Road's success was not based on any one empire but on redundancy. Knowledge was stored in many hubs, from Dunhuang caves to Samarkand libraries, so that no single collapse could wipe it out entirely. Another point I want to emphasize is that translation was not just copying words, it was an active creative process. When Xuanzang or Kumarjiva translated Sanskrit into Chinese, they often invented new terms because exact matches didn't exist. Similarly, in Baghdad, Al-Biruni compared Indian astronomy with Greek geometry and produced entirely new results in trigonometry. These examples show that cultural exchange was not passive, it was cumulative and innovative, an engine of progress. Finally, I think these lessons still matter today. Modern initiatives like China's Belt and Road emphasize infrastructure, but if you look back, the real power of the Silk Road lay in people to people exchange, like translators, teachers, archives, and workshops. Roads and ports may enable trade, but only institutions of learning gives roots lasting meaning. So to conclude, the Silk Road was not just about moving goods, it was about moving minds. The Dunhuang painting of Xuanzang shows us the creative growth of ideas, while the Baghdad siege warns us of their vulnerability. Together, they teach us that the survival of knowledge depends not on wealth or armies, but on human bridges, scholars, translators, and educators. If there is one lesson we should take from this, it is that investing in human capacity is what makes cultural exchange enduring. Thank you.
Good afternoon, I'm hum101 from group 9. Today my presentation topic is commodities and economic flow of Silk Road. So I'd like to start the conversation with a quote. The quote is, "It was not only good that flowed along the Artises that linked the Pacific, Central Asia, India, and Persian Gulf, and the Mediterranean in antiquity, so did the ideas." It's from the book of Frank Copan. I begin this quotation because it captures my central point. Commodities are never just physical things. Whether we talk about silk, semiconductors, spices, oil, these goods carry power, culture, inequality along with them. My thesis is simple. By comparing commodities across time and scape, from ancient silk and spices to modern oil and electronics, we see how trade has always been about identity and dependency as much as wealth. The Silk Road were never a single highway but a shifting way of caravans, roads, ports, and market that linked China, India, Middle East, Europe between 22nd to 14th century. These routes carried not only silk, spice, and horses, but also technologies, religions, and diplomatic practices. What I find striking is how much this resembles today's world if we swap caravans for ports and camel for fiber optic cables. The underlying principle is the same. If we talk about silk was not just a luxury textile, it was a diplomatic tool and a symbol of elite status in Rome and China. We know that from our source of Christian 2000. The Christian 2000 emphasizes that Silk Roads were about network, sales structure, and politics and states. Today, electronics play a parallel role. Smartphones and semiconductors, largely produced in East Asia, are both symbol of modernity and foundation of state power. What fascinates me here is the continuity. The silk shifted from luxury to everyday clothes over the centuries, just as smartphone moved from the passing time to everyday necessary that we need. Spices. Spices transform cuisines and social rituals across Asia. They are also driver for exploration and later colonialism. Francopan 2015 reminds us that the real value of these goods was not just in their taste but the cultural practice they carried. In our world, oil plays the same role. If we consider if one country had the whole reserve of oil, then other countries would depend on it. But it's not and never an ideal situation that one country had that much power. If we talk about horses, back in the day, horses and camels were the main mean of transportation. Control of horse breeding and trade gave Central Asian empires enormous military advantages. Today, strategic commodities like semiconductors, rare earth materials, and uranium play the same role of holding the bigger power. If we look at the country dynamics, Russia once dominated horse routes across the whole Eurasia, but nowadays they do with oil and gas pipelines. India moved from spice dominance to becoming the hub of IT and mid-value electronics. The United States is the world's largest consumer market. Consumption patterns and tech companies dictate global production, competing disproportionate profits. Personally, as US consumer, I cannot ignore how many habits and connected to hidden labor and environmental costs. France and Italy are the hub of fashion, the old luxury goods. Yet UNESCO notes the produce often capture less value than consumers status do. So if we use luxury goods, we put pressure on the producers and they do not get their actual value. So what do we learn by tracing the arc of silk and semiconductors? From spices to oil, from silk to semiconductor, from horse to rare earth materials, we learn that commodities are never neutral. They are political tools that shape identity, culture, and inequality. For me, this is the lesson that what we buy, how we regulate, how we build supply chains matters. Ancient merchants reshaped the world by moving silk and spices. Today, our generation reshaped with oil and challenging oil luxury goods. That challenging is ensuring that new silk routes creates not dependency but fairness. Thank you.
Hello, I am Sajjad Hossain Shad. Today, I present my analysis on pirates as shadow regulators over maritime governance from Tang Dynasty to modern day South China Seas. The South China Sea map under the Tang Dynasty shows more than just trade routes. It reveals a thousand-year pattern of how piracy functions as an unofficial regulatory system that fills governance gaps in international waters. My main analytical point challenges the usual view of pirates. Instead of seeing them only as criminals who disrupt the business and trades, I argue that pirates actually functioned as a kind of shadow government. They collected unofficial taxes and enforced order in areas where formal authorities had little to no control. Surprisingly, the pirates' role helped strengthen the official maritime governance over the years. During the 8th and 9th centuries, the Tang dynasty faced a big challenge in governing the seas. At that time, maritime trade grew rapidly thanks to better shipbuilding technology and navigation. This made the South China Sea an important trade route, which was already a major part of the maritime silk routes in the area. But pirates during this period did not see themselves as criminals. Instead, they thought they were collecting unofficial taxes from ships passing through their territories. Robert Anthony's 2003 research in Like Froth Floating on the Sea supports this. He shows that pirates describe their actions as levying duties on personal goods rather than plain stealing. This proves that pirates considered their work a form of unofficial taxation, not just random theft. This matters because
Wherever the Tang government had weak control, pirates filled the gap. They set up their own rules and collected taxes, acting like unofficial rulers in the seas. The Tang tributary system worked in some places, but in areas it could not reach, pirates controlled the seas. The Tang government's response confirms this, as Gungwu Wang wrote in his 2015 Journal of Asian History article. The Tang did not fight pirates randomly. They expanded their navy and made formal rules to control the seas. This shows that the government turned the pirates' unofficial system into a formal, more structured system. Now, I would like to talk about the modern parallels and cyclical analysis. The power of this shadow regulation theory becomes really clear when we look at what's happening today. The same pattern kept repeating itself over and over again. Piracy doesn't just disappear, it comes and goes in cycles based on how strong or weak the governments are. Adam Young, in his 2007 study Contemporary Maritime Piracy in Southeast Asia, confirms this pattern. He says that quote unquote piracy has been endemic in the South China and surrounding seas for centuries, with a long history of piracy waxing and waning depending how the political and economic situation are. Here's the key insight. Piracy isn't just random crime. It built into the system. It's structural rather than just bad luck. Look at the numbers. Piracy attacks dropped way down to 47 incidents in 2009, but then jumped back up to 128 by 2013. Martin Murphy's 2014 analysis in Petropiracy, Oil and Troubled Waters explains why this happens. If there is any bottom line in the fight against piracy, it's always the resources. When governments have money and ships to patrol, piracy goes down. When they don't, it comes back up. And look at how today's governments respond. It's exactly the same as the Tang Dynasty. Instead of a single naval patrol, we now have international maritime bureau coalitions, digital surveillance system, and multinational naval task forces. These are just modern versions of what the Tang court did. Formal government systems taking back control from pirates' unofficial rule. My analytical contribution extends Angela Schottenhammer's 2007 argument in the Maritime Silk Road book, which states that the Maritime Silk Road was fundamentally a contested space shaped by competing interests and recurring insecurity. However, I argue we must go further analytically. Understanding piracy as shadow regulation rather than pure criminally explains three crucial historical patterns. First, why piracy persists across centuries? Because it fills systematic governance gaps, not random opportunities. Second, why state responses follow similar patterns? They are reclaiming the regulatory control, not just suppressing the crime. Third, why piracy paradoxically strengthens the maritime system? Because it forces institutional innovations that ultimately enhance formal governance capacity. The analytical framework reveals that maritime trade routes are never naturally secure. They require continuous transformation of shadow regulatory spaces into formal governance systems. The South China Sea, from Tang Dynasty to today, demonstrate that where commerce flows, informal regulations emerges. The historical imperative remains constant. States must innovate institutionally to maintain control over global state trade networks. Understanding this pattern provides crucial insights for contemporary maritime security policy. Piracy is not just a problem to suppress, but a symptom of governance gaps requiring systematic institutional responses. That was all from me. Thank you.
First of all, thank you, sir, for giving me the floor. Good morning, everyone. My name is Rakibul Haq. I am from Computer Science Department, and today I will present on the topic merchant networks and international markets on the Silk Roads of the ancient and temporary worlds. That is basically a comparison of timescapes with a special focus on global power dynamics and market integration. So first of all, let me clarify what does my focus area means. Global power dynamics refers to the way that states and empires exercise dominance in international affairs. At the same time, market integration is a process of linking distant economies into one connected system. So why is it important to understand this? It is very important to understand because history is not a static record of the past. Rather, it is an interpretation of how and why events unfolded and how patterns of power and exchange contribute to shape our world today. So let's go to the historical background. We can see that the Silk Roads at the very beginning in the late 3rd to 2nd centuries were not only routes of the commerce but also networks of power. Geographically, they stretched from the Xianchang in China through the Tarim Basin across the Iranian cities such as the Rey, Nishapur, Merv, Yazd, Isfahan, Hormuz, and further west to Baghdad, Aleppo, Busra, and the Mediterranean markets. These cities were more than trading stations because they were the hubs of taxations, cultural exchange, and political authority. As Kazanov in the year 2007 argued that the Iranians were the intermediaries in the Silk Road trade. Similarly, Falls in the year 1999 noted that the trade of the Silk Road was more dominated by Iranian merchants than any other single group. Both remind us that geography translated into bargaining power. The Iranian states and merchants controlled flow, levied taxes, and shaped legitimacy. During the Sasanian Empire, the Iranian ports monetized and policed trade. Under the Abbasids, Baghdad and Basra became strategic nodes. Later, the Mongols created the Pax Mongolica, reducing banditry and standardizing rules. As Low and May in the year 2004 observed that the Silk Roads had their apogee under the Mongol Empire, China too relied on their infrastructure to regulate commerce. So a great example would be the Great Wall of China was not just military as it was economic. Callahan in the year 2018 stated that the Great Wall is no mere monument of the military architecture but rather a monument of identity politics that shapes the concept of the Chinese foreign policy as defensive. It taxed goods as well, controlled by the caravans, and also regulated who entered and who stayed out. So if we have to tell about the story of continuity, the role of Iran and China comes first. So Iran has always been more than a passageway, it was a broker of exchange. By taxing the caravans and controlling overland routes, it converted geography into power. Today Iran continues this logic with the China Belt Roads initiatives, widely known as the BRI, leveraging its position between Central Asia and the Persian Gulf and Europe. The China in the meanwhile has shifted strategies. While the Great Wall was symbolized once exclusion, the BRI symbolizes expansion. Hillman in the year 2020 also stated that it describes as a strategy of influence, dependency, and global integration. This shows continuity that both ancient and modern China pursued market integration as a tool of sovereignty through different infrastructure. Previously it was the walls and in the present it is corridors now. So if we merge all the things together, basically combine them, then China Inner demonstrates how geography can be repeatedly politicized across the timescapes. Iran as the connector and China as the architect of the integration. So another question comes in our mind that is China and Muslim countries are partners or they are channels basically. But the story extends beyond Iran because China's relation with the Muslim majority countries also reveal the asymmetry of integration. Historically, Muslim regions such as the Baghdad, Basra, Samarkand and later the Ottoman hubs were indispensable for the Silk Road trade. They allowed Chinese goods, silk, porcelain, paper to move westward, while the Chinese courts controlled entry points and imposed selective exchange. Today, the same pattern repeats. Callahan, again in the year 2016, argues that China frames Muslim majority nations not as equals but as vital corridors for energy and markets. The Middle East and North Africa, that was rich in oil, also in gas, treated the pipelines and ports rather than the sovereign actors. The framing reduces states to channel of circulation, while they benefit through investment, debt risks, political leverage, and cultural harmonization expose vulnerabilities. Thus, while Iran strategically negotiates its role as a broker, other Muslim majority nations often face deeper dependency. The comparison shows us two distinct positions. Number one, Iran uses its geography to preserve bargaining power. Another one is Muslim countries are increasingly positioned as passive corridors in China's design. So if we have to critically compare these terms, it reveals that the relations are never simply cooperative. That has to be. They are structured by asymmetry unconditionally and survival needs. Ancient empires and modern China alike do not integrate markets for equality. They integrate them to consolidate power. Iran's historical agency shows that some states can leverage geography, but most Muslim nations today risk being framed only as functional corridors, much like how Central Asian hubs once thrived but remained vulnerable under the Mongolian Chinese oversight. To conclude, the Silk Road's ancient and modern demonstrates that commerce is never just economic. It is political, cultural, also it is tied to power. Iran exemplifies how geography can be leveraged to resist subordination and retain influence. China's relation with the Muslim majority countries reveal how integration are often reproduce hierarchies, where smaller states are framed as roads not equals. Thus the real source of power lies not in the goods, but traded in the control of circulation. Who sets the rules, who builds the corridors, and who decides the term of exchange? Thank you for listening. That's all from me.